RM Sotheby's is the world's largest collector car auction house by total sales. They are the preeminent market maker of high-quality collector cars and collections, regardless of size or complexity. By working in partnership with the Sotheby's team and its network of 80 offices in 40 countries, RM Sotheby's has established the largest client network of any collector car auction house in the world. Join the RM Sotheby's family by connecting with one of their car specialists at rmsotheby's.com or contact me directly at gstanley@rmsotheby's.com. Okay, welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a bunch of big sales coming up with RM Sotheby's, and I cannot talk about all of them. So I've got an expert on the line here with me, Evan Ide. Evan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Well, since this is your first time on the podcast, you have recently came over to be a car specialist with RM Sotheby's. If you would, tell my listeners a little bit about you and your experience in the collector car world.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, I've just joined earlier this year with RM after 22 years with Bonhams, competitor auction house, and I my main focus over the years has been pre-war cars. Has always been my specialty, and I got connected with Bonhams while I was curator of a antique car museum here in Massachusetts. So basically, out of school till now, I've always had my career in the antique car world, and specifically the early car pre-war world has been my specialty. And I've always joked that my sort of unfashionable niche in the hobby has always kept me extremely busy over the years. It's a niche of the industry, but there's a lot of activity, and it's always kept me very busy. And I've always had a dual role where I've been an auction specialist, but I've also maintained my own shop here in Massachusetts as well. So I work on mainly pre-World War One cars, but some cars up to the 30s. So it kind of gave me a little bit of a different role in the business, where a kind of useful point of view, being someone who's hands-on as well as a car specialist, has always been very useful to me.
I know at our Scottsdale auction, I overheard you and Roger Wilbanks talking, he's a pre-war guy as well, and he was
Mhm.
so thankful that you're with RM because he can finally have somebody to talk and go pre-war car nerd crazy with, right?
Yeah, we can nerd out all we want. So, yep, happy. No, it's good to have some sympathetic ears around.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, you're here to kind of talk about this incredible Mercedes
Mhm.
that's coming up for sale. I just interviewed Ken Gross about the Ferrari 250 LM that is coming up on Monday. So I will have a special, not for sale on Monday, but I'll have a special edition coming out on Monday as well, talking about these incredible cars. So if you would, could you just give us an overview of the 1954 Mercedes-Benz, the W196? I'm going to call it the Streamliner because I cannot
Yeah.
say that word in German. If you can, by all means, the estimate is in excess of 50 million euros, and kind of the
Yes.
highlights as far as why this is such a
Yeah.
special, not only Mercedes, but historical race car as well.
Right. I mean, this might be certainly one of the most significant automobiles ever to be available in an auction or available publicly. It's a basically, these cars have been an unbuyable, unobtainable thing over the years, and there's a lot to say about these cars and why they're so significant, but they're largely considered sort of the most important Formula One racing car of all time, and they are a example of one of Mercedes' greatest products they ever made at the kind of height of their technical virtuosity. And Mercedes is interesting because they've had, I was going to say, maybe four moments in history where they've absolutely dominated that period of time. When they set out to dominate, are extremely successful about it. There was the period before World War One, in a way that they had their most prominent position because they were held in such high regard over the rest of the competition at that point. Extremely successful in racing. In the pre-World War One, pre-World War II era, with the sort of government-funded Silver Arrow program, which absolutely dominated Grand Prix racing in a way that has never happened again, where unlimited government money fueled the most technologically advanced racing cars ever built at that point. And then uh, after World War II, this period, this early post-war period, where Mercedes basically rises from ruin. Their factory is destroyed. The country is destroyed in many ways. And by 1947, they're resuming limited production at their factory of making automobiles, a lot of them based on pre-war stuff that they could assemble. And you think only 5 years later, they start developing this car, which would be, so incredibly advanced, and the technological achievement it was. The fact that it would be like today if there was a car company that was wiped off the face of the earth in 2020, and in 2025 they're racing Formula One with the most dominant racing car there is. This is only 5 years basically that they go from nothing to producing this car. And the car itself is such a standout of its era because it's both the amount of technology in it and the sophistication of the engineering of it is so beyond all the competition. And then the quality of it and the execution of it and the success of it in the period goes hand in hand. But if you just run through the technological innovations of this thing, and if you think about what Ferrari and Maserati and Lancia and the other competitors were doing at the time, this was a purpose-built car to win, to dominate the Grand Prix. And it was based around the fact that the Grand Prix formula was going to be 2.5 liters. And with anticipation of this 2.5 liter rule, they clean sheeted paper designed a car optimized around that rule. And the heart of it is they did their homework and realized an 8-cylinder engine is the most efficient motor in that capacity. That still holds true today, I believe. The 2.5 liter and the 8-cylinder are very well suited. But at the time, they didn't want the height and weight of a V8. So, the V engine limits what you can do with it positionally in the car. And they wanted a motor that could be laid down nearly on its side to lower the frontal area and the weight of the car. So the problem with the straight 8 of that era was the harmonics you got out of the crankshaft limited the RPM. So they devised a motor that the drive output of this motor was taken off the center of it. So the clutch was not bolted to the back of the motor. The drive was out the center. And all the accessories and everything was driven off the center of this motor to remote clutch to a transaxle. And from there, they fit this motor out with forged steel cylinders with welded water jackets. They do a lot of work on the valve train of this thing and realized ideally they'd run a 2-valve motor instead of a 4, but they need to create an entirely new concept of actuating valves to achieve the RPM they want. So they devised a desmodronic valve system that had no springs. So there's a cam lobe that opens the valve, and then there's a D-shaped cam that then lifts and shuts the valve. Really very high-tech stuff at the time. By doing this, they could have gigantic valves and still push a targeted near 9,000 RPM redline. So there was nothing off the shelf technologically or used here. This was absolute clean sheet of paper design. And it was also to have direct injection, fuel injection as well. So this thing might as well come from outer space at the time. It's so advanced, and that's just the sort of highlights of the motor end of it. It was fitted in this incredibly low chassis with this slung down engine with they wanted to reduce unsprung weight, so they put the brake drums on the front of the chassis, mounted to the chassis, and they had drive shafts growing to the front wheels to allow the brakes to be mounted within the chassis. And then on top of that, they clothed this thing in this incredible streamlined coachwork, which was to take advantage of their aerodynamic knowledge and prowess. And it did create a car with incredibly high top speed, and it is the only full-bodied Formula One car to ever win a Grand Prix, which the streamlined coachwork proved impractical for Grand Prix racing in that it didn't allow the driver to sight the wheels, and that was a problem which eventually led to it not being used the following year just for the driver's convenience. But it would definitely produced a faster car. It was just one that was harder to drive in certain circuits. So the so if you know, and a lot of what drives this hobby and interest in collecting cars is the mechanics and the technology and the craftsmanship, and there is nothing like these cars in that way. You know, that is just the most incredible technology, but still in an era where it's entirely handmade. And you know, being a fabricator and restorer myself, you know, I just like, I mean, it is just a feast to look at these cars. You know, everything is hand shaped and gas welded, and even all the plumbing, the lines and plumbing, everything is nothing off the shelf. You know, everything is made by hand and just incredibly beautiful in the construction. And everywhere you look at the car, it's like that. So it's just, I mean, they are the most incredible cars of their time, without doubt.
It's funny because, you know, as I go through the pictures and all, you can see that it's hand built just because, you know, it might not be a perfect circle where the, you know, for the wheel well or some
Mm.
indulations in the body panels, but it's that authentic hand hammered, you know, whatever that was put into these cars. And it is absolutely stunning. I think it's one of the prettiest cars I've ever seen.
Oh yeah.
If you're audio only, it's a silver car. It's streamliner, like I said. It's center seat. Now, am I correct that the pedals are on either side of the tunnel?
Yeah, the single seater car like that. Yeah, you would straddle the tunnel and have the clutch on one side and the brake and gas on the other side. So which is, it seems a little bit weird, but you're actually quite braced for the corners and all. I think because you could really leverage the your legs to keep you stabilized in the car. And but uh, it is a, you know, a high watermark of craftsmanship that we'd never see again in racing cars. You know, this is the pinnacle. And you know, one other thing that makes this particular car so significant, you know, any of these cars are significant. And you know, the factory kept most of them. They donated a handful of them to museums after the war. The only ones that have ever come out are the ones that were de-accessioned. Only one other was de-accessioned from a museum and sold privately, and that was not a streamliner. But this car, though, as an artifact of a Grand Prix car of the 1950s, this thing is like it was taken off the track in 1954 and turned off and not touched. So you look under the hood, you'll see the original hoses, clamps, fittings. Nothing has been changed. You know, any car that would have been driven and raced and used since this time would have loads of new equipment, new fasteners, new other things. But this car is an absolute time capsule of the era. I mean, it's still running 1950s Continental racing tires. You know, it is, and they're, and that doesn't, you're just not going to find a racing car of this era that was just taken off a, it's like taken off a track and put in a bell jar. You know, it is an absolute, as an artifact of the time, there's really like nothing like it. You know, most of the cars that Mercedes themselves own, a lot of those cars have been used, so they've been, you know, worked on and updated over, you know, kept running. So they're not this, you know, perfect state of preservation like this car is.
Right. And now this obviously has some really big drivers behind the wheel. Fangio, Moss. I mean, just the history from a racing perspective and pedigree is pretty strong as well, correct?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, being a factory Mercedes racing time of this car of this time, it's going to have been driven by the best drivers of the time, and you know, Fangio and Moss are the two most prominent winning drivers of the time with these cars, and you know, they're very associated with Fangio especially. I mean, that's really a particularly one of the all-time great relationships. It's sort of, you know, Senna and the McLaren. It's the Fangio and the W196.
All right. So I have three questions for you here. First off, the new owners, what do you hope they do with it? Second question is what would you do with it? And third question is what do you think it's going to hammer for?
Um, well, the car's interesting because I mean it creates a conversation because it's not a straightforward car because it's in this state of preservation. It's this very significant car, obviously, one of the great objects of its time, motoring or not. I I have some strong opinions regarding what you know. I look at it this way and say it's um, it's a very valuable car, and I would almost prefer the car just stay the way it is, and whoever bought it commission a twin of it that you could drive because the replicas of cars like this have been produced and if produced in an exacting manner like that with assistance from the factory and all, you'd have something you could go out and properly drive without risking this thing and sort of defacing the originality of it. So I don't know how you really balance the two with the thing, where you know do you make a second engine for it, take the one out all intact like it is, and have something to then drive? I mean, it's a car that it's it's a cars like this are complicated, and how you responsibly use them and how you um, preserve what's there and what's really significant about the thing, but also have a chance to experience it and operate it. So, I mean, I like cars like this because they create a conversation about this stuff. And in some ways, we don't talk about it enough about the idea of, risk and reward and, how we deal with things that are in a, extreme state of preservation and things that haven't been messed with in so long. You don't rush into a car like that because there's a lot to consider there about, how you go about, if you were to recommission it, and you have to treat it almost, I almost think things like this because they're so unique in their things like this that survive. You almost have to take a bit of like a approach it like you would have, archaeologically. Like if you did start working on it, you really have to like take and carefully preserve everything you would take off that, right down to some things that you would deem insignificant, old hoses and things, but they are still like probably the only intact examples of what was being used at that time. Um, I mean, that's a fun kind of, thought too, that I like that idea of there's a lot to study on this thing and really kind of learn from it at the same time. So, I mean, I'd be kind of, I don't know exactly what the right answer is with the thing, but I'd almost there's some kind of solution in there that's to use it properly. But I almost think for the value of the car, what it would cost to make a twin of it, um, that's not out of the equation.
Right.
Uh,
Okay. Now, from a valuation perspective, I didn't think about this, so someone mentioned it to me. RM has it in excess of 50 million euros, which, if I did the math right, it was around $58 million, something like that.
Yes, it's pretty close these days.
Yeah, and someone said, why can't it break 100 million? Because the Uhlenhaut Coupe didn't have any racing history. Now that was one of two, and again, a stunning car that nobody ever thought would be available.
Yeah.
What would you ballpark it? I mean, I'm not holding it to anything, but it just seems like, man, you never know till it actually crosses, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't, it's always difficult to throw darts on the wall at this level because it's just like you typically what can happen is, once two people have set their mind to owning this thing, once it gets to a certain point, what difference does it make? That's another 10 million or whatever. You've already
Right.
committed your mind to spending this. It seems to kind of go in those increments. So, um, yeah, it's one of those things. It would either sells for 50 or it sells for 100, or I can see it on either extreme like that. But it's it's hard to it's a very difficult car to pin down a value on. I think it sort of transcends being an automobile in a lot of ways. And there are very few cars that kind of do that, where they, you know, they're not, the value of other cars doesn't have a lot of impact on it. It is just, and you could make an argument with a car like that it is, of if you laid out and made a list of all the things that man produced in 1954, where does that car fall on the list? And I think that car is an exceptional product of humans in a sense. There's that is right up there as one of the greatest. Happens to be an automobile, but it is one of the great achievements of humans at that time. It's such a synthesis of technology and craftsmanship and aesthetics and all. It's a really, really special thing. So there's always the possibility where, because if you look at, in the automobiles are still relatively, they aren't the same value as the fine art market, what paintings sell for, and, contemporary art or old masters and things. And a car like that kind of crosses over a little bit into that world, I think, or has the possibility to, because it's very special. I mean, you could see it sitting in the middle of an art collection, with paintings hanging around it, because it is just a absolutely magnificent thing, and it's also a completely unspoiled object.
So, not to hold your feet to the fire, but if you were to throw one number out, what would it be?
Oh, people keep asking me this thing.
I'm
don't
going to
know.
say
I wouldn't be surprised if it sold for 75 million. That I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, there's justification in that with the other car. I mean, I think the Uhlenhaut is a two-seat road car to some extent. It's certainly underpinnings of it are very similar to this car. It's not really a car you can use on the street, and it was a car that had quite a few more restrictions on what you could do with it. This one's a much more free and clear thing. But I think, I would imagine the bidders will look at it in the same light, in that it's just a monumentally important cultural artifact, is what it is. And I would not be surprised if it ends up in German hands, because traditionally I found they recognize the significance of their cultural history, the collectors there, and have often made sure some of that significant stuff stays there or lands there. Granted, the last time one of these came up, the only other time, it didn't end up in Germany, but we'll see. I mean, I think this one's different. The one that sold in 2012 was an open wheel car. It was a really great car. It was the world's most expensive car ever sold at the time, but it doesn't have the aesthetics that this sort of there's a sort of air around the stream. Any Mercedes Streamliner that's just one of those, because there's never ever been a chance to buy one. Whether it's
Right.
the ones from the 30s or this one. So it is a much more of an object of just wonderful aesthetics, that the other one was a great looking car, but it wasn't like this. And and we see the photos of it, but if you haven't actually stood in front of it and looked around it, you don't really get it until you see the thing in front of you. I mean, you talk about a car that's got some presence. I mean, it just is really something in the flesh.
Yeah, and just for reference, the last one sold with Bonhams for just under $30 million, another Fangio car. And you're right. When I saw the Streamliner at Monterey, when they were announcing it, it was in the garage. You might have been there. I don't recall, because it was such a crazy moment. I just looked in the corner. I'm like, what the heck is that thing over there? Because it looked like a spaceship. And then I was walking up there, and I remember Shelby had to take the steering wheel out for some reason, which detaches. And he say,
Yep.
"Hey, here, hold this for a minute." And so I took a picture of it, and I said on
Yeah.
Instagram, I said, "Fangio, Moss, and Stanley. One of these is not like the others." And then my buddy responded, "Yeah, you're alive." I'm like, "Oh yeah, you're right. I was more referencing the driving skills than anything else." So, well,
Yes.
thank you so much for your time today, Evan. Real quick, tell our listeners what's a cool car that's in your garage. I know you were showing a neat little car to Roger the other day.
Uh, well, I've got 18 cars here, but we've got a Itala 120 horse Itala Grand Prix car 1907, which is
Okay.
a car I really like, 15-liter four-cylinder car. Got a finishing a restoration on a 60 horsepower Alco chain drive car, 50 horse Mercedes. And one of my favorite cars here is an 1898 Morse four-cylinder car, which is a bit the W196 in its day. It's just absolutely loaded with high-tech technology for the time, and this super original, wonderful car. So
Wow.
and yeah, very lucky to have, we have some great cars around here and get to work on the really primo stuff. So it's a lot of fun. And but everything from 1898 to about 19, let's see, newest thing here is probably 1910 at the moment. So
Are any of brands that still exist?
I have a Bugatti. It's not in the garage at the moment. It's elsewhere at the
Okay.
moment. That still exists. Well, I don't. You could say it's the name still exists. It's not really connected to the company. I don't think there's anything else that still exists. We got two Thomas Flyers, Packard, Dirac, De Dion, three Panhards, and yeah, the Alco Simplex, Duesenberg. No, no, all orphans. The closest things.
Bugatti is the closest. Okay.
Yep.
All right, Evan. Well, thank you so much for covering the W196 on the Collector Car Podcast. I really appreciate it. And I'm assuming I'll see you in Miami.
Of course, got all my big boys down there. The big. We should talk about the real big Mercedes, the 17.5 liter one we're selling from the Indy Museum down there. So that's the other great Mercedes we've got coming up.
All right. Well, we'll save that for the Miami special. We'll have you cover that. How
Oh,
about that?
excellent.
All right. Thank you so much, Evan.
You're welcome.